every sport has its legend. I guess we look at touring car racing in Australia, the great Peter Brock. We look at football and the likes of Pelé and Maradona. In Australian karting, there's one man who's won more titles than anyone else. We're delighted to be joined by John Pizarro. John, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Well, 15 Australian karting championships, that's more than anybody in the history of the sport in this country has achieved. Did you envisage that would be the case when you started way back in the early 1960s?
Never my intention to get the most number of championships, just keep winning races.
So how did it start for you, and when was that?
About 1964, if I recall. 64, 45 I was born, 64 was about right. Just married, little baby, go-kart, little Morris minor utility. Yeah, back in the old days.
And that first race in New South Wales?
Yes, Granville, a CZ motorcycle engine that broke a conrod down the main straight, so that was very short-lived. In partnership with my brother-in-law, he decided that wasn't a good deal, so he jumped out and I kept going.
So that was the early 1960s. When did it start to get a little bit more competitive for you?
About the second year. Had a fellow by the name of Ron Drost. He was an old Dutchman, he was a great fella. He taught me how to drive properly, taught me how to overtake. I could get around the track okay, reasonable speed, but not overtake. Once I learnt the art of overtaking, then I managed to win a few races. Once you win, you want to keep winning. So that was my philosophy, keep winning.
So those first few races, when was the first big one? When was the first national championship, and how many attempts did it take to get that first national title?
That was in 1972 or 3, I'm not quite sure, 2 I think. Over in Adelaide, that was on the car circuit. It was a road race event. That was relatively easy. Sprint tracks are the hardest deal. Took me a long while. It took me to about 75 to get a national championship. I'm guessing now. I haven't got the notes in front of me. Sometimes.
So that was 12 years of racing before you won your first national title. It must, you must shake your head at some people that come into the sport. They think they're going to be the next Schumacher. They do karting for 2 or 3 years and then disappear into car racing. It took you 12 years to get your first one.
Yep. Yeah, they don't realise what's involved. A lot of hard work. The harder you work, the luckier you get, my motto.
So that first national title in 1972 and then 1975. Tell us about some of the karts of the day in the 1970s.
Well, I can clearly remember going to Queensland to Southside in about 68, I think, for my first national championship. Seized the engine, didn't go very far. The next year was down to Seymour in Victoria. One of my mates tipped me over. We had no side bars or Nerf bars or side pods or any of that stuff. And he came underneath me in a corner, in practice mind you. I lost yards of skin, stung like hell, I can remember that. Continued on and ran about 4th or 5th. Did that quite a few times. Been out of a kart more times than not. Probably why I've had to have an operation on my head. But anyway, that's the luck of the game.
The engines back then, are we talking adapted motorcycle type engines, or when did the first purpose-built kart engines in Australia start to become the norm?
You're testing my memory now, Ian. Yamaha came along. No, that's not quite correct. I started off with a Victor lawnmower engine. More correctly, I started off with a CZ motorcycle engine. Graduated to a Victor. B standard, went pretty good that thing. I made my own ignition stolen from a McCulloch chainsaw. McCulloch was one of the first engines, genuine go-kart engines from America. And then the Italians got on the scene and they refined the engines. They made much better engines than the Americans. Had DAP, it was the people I drove for years. Went to 5 world championships for DAP. Drove alongside Ayrton Senna and Terry Fullerton.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Of course, there's the 15 Australian championships, but you raced overseas regularly. When was the first time? That must have been the mid to late 70s that you ventured offshore?
75. World Championship, Paul Ricard. Famous track down the south of France. I remember the raw eggs we had for breakfast, almost raw. Terrible. We stopped in a hotel down in Marseille. The bacon and eggs for breakfast. Bloody things are nearly raw. Oh, awful. I met up with a couple of Aussies guys, Jeff Cullen and a fellow from down south, down from Victoria, Kenny, can't remember. He'll be mad when he sees this. And Adrian Coggins came over with us. Adrian decided that the end of the straight was full speed, whacking the fence into hospital. That was the end of him. The Americans that all came over to that track didn't race. They said it was too dangerous. I thought, bugger me, what am I going to do? Too far to come not to race. I raced, didn't do any good. Actually, I didn't do any good in any of the World Championships, but I learnt a volume. The main reason for going was always you hope to win, always go to try and win, but that was not going to happen. So I learnt a lot. In fact, I learnt so much in 1980, the last time I went to Belgium. I came from Belgium back to Japan, Asian Pacific Championship, fastest lap time in the qualifying. A Jap came along and went 100th of a second faster in his second time lap, so he was given the nod correctly, and I was knocked back to second.
That was Suzuka or Sugo?
That was Sugo. Yep. That's where that horrible, what do you call that thing, typhoon, that big event, they wiped out a heap of people.
Oh, yeah.
The tsunami,
Yes.
Yeah, terrible. If that was owned by Yamaha, they were very nice. They paid me to go across there three times, and race for DAP, of course.
Of course, we should just point out DAP being one of the most famous manufacturers of karts in the world, made in Italy, and you race for DAP in the World Championships. Your teammate just had a movie made about him posthumously. You were Ayrton Senna's teammate. That is just words don't describe that amazing fact.
In hindsight, it was pretty special, but at the time it was just another smart young kid from Brazil, very fast. Terry Fullerton said to Angelo Perilla, the first time they went out testing, he said, that kid's very fast. And for Terry to say that was something in those days. Terry was a very hard nut. I got along well with him, fortunately for me, because I learnt a lot from Terry.
You're talking about Terry Fullerton, 1973 world champion. Only won it once, but most people around the world of karting in 5 odd decades suggest that he was the greatest kart racing driver of all time.
The greatest driver of all time. The greatest, the best.
So this was the 1970s, early 80s. When was it that you decided to start the Sprinter brand of karts, start manufacturing your own karts, and why did you do that? Why, after being with the DAP kart team for so long, why did Sprinter karts come about?
Well, I've been involved in the sport for so long, it became almost part of my life. It was part of my life. My wife and kids stopped home while I went away racing. Sprinter karts was developed based on the DAP kart. They had the best kart in the world. I thought there's nothing better than to copy the best. I'm not an inventor. I can improve on things, but I don't claim to be the smartest bloke in the world, just smart enough to listen.
And you won the national championships continually throughout the 1980s. I think your last one came in the 200cc superclass, 1993, Wanneroo in Perth. I hear the story, but I've never asked you firsthand. Apparently, that was the class that you hadn't won a national title in, so you thought you'd give it a go, went to Perth and won it. Is that correct?
Totally incorrect, Ian.
You'll have to correct me, John.
Yes, I will. That's the class you race when you can't race. When you're not good enough to race a single, you go race twins. They're awesome fun, great fun to drive, but it's a posers class. That's the class where all the spectators come up to the fence and wait to see the crashes. But I made sure I kept out of those. It was a very fun class to drive. It's a power that you couldn't believe in a go-kart. About 50 horsepower, 2 20 horsepower engines on methanol. Goes like flat out of hell and stops like a sixpence. They had front brakes, they had all the works and jerks. Cost a fortune to build, but it was fun to drive.
It was certainly fun to watch, spectacular to watch. I think your last race was 1995, Dubbo, if I'm not mistaken. Third place in the National Championships. That was your last race.
Fastest qualifier, third in the finals. Had a bit of help to get back to third, but anyway, not to go forward. That's the way it goes, that's the luck of the game.
And your thoughts on karting? Now you're here at the 2011 Stars of Karting final. How can this possibly compare to when you started back in the early 1960s?
It's a different horse now, it's different game. Looks good to me. I just had a quick look at the KZ2 class, that looks pretty good. Some of those guys are pretty smart. I see the bloke that just came third, he was saving his tyres, so he sat back in third, didn't try and go forward, had enough speed but he didn't need to. I think you'll see him duck up in the final and leave him behind.
Well, the driver you're referring to there is actually David Serra. He's won 12 national titles. He's got 3 to go to catch you. John Pizarro, it's been an absolute pleasure to discuss karting with you.
Thank you, Ian. It's fun. Thank you.